bro, don't. Oh, hang on, I've got one of these things. It's the worst thing. It's the worst thing. The plastic lining's coming off inside. It feels greasy. I think Pacitti wore these last, and he's got quite clammy skin. That's just, yeah, you can see that it's all horrible in there. Hello there, I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com, and this is how WWE should have... Wait. What? Yes, welcome to how WCW should have booked, where I look back at infamous WCW missed booking opportunities and talk about how I will book them differently because I'm a smartass. So why haven't we done a WCW booking video before? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, after 1998, you've got to do pretty much everything. And also, it's really hard to envision a scenario where everyone in the locker room will want to come together for the sake of a storyline. In WWE, you had one guy at the top, Big Vinny, Big Vince, Big Boob Vince McMahon. What am I talking about? You have him running the entire show, and he can make sure that things happen a certain way, so that barring injuries, if he just stays on storyline focus, stay on target, then a storyline will happen. Whereas in WCW, there were like 5, 6 people running the show. You had Hogan, Hall, Nash, Bischoff, Savage, Piper. All those guys had huge creative control. I mean, that's kind of what happens if your entire locker room strategy is import guys who've already built themselves up somewhere else and know exactly what they're worth. Why did I point to myself when I said know exactly what they're worth? I'm worth dick. I'm really worth nothing. So basically, yeah, it's hard to come up with a storyline that you book 6 months in advance, because at any point Hulk Hogan could just turn up and say, yeah, I don't think I want to do that, brother. I'll rather work with my friend Louis Spinoli in the main event. I don't. So any attempt at long-term storylines, which is what I tend to do here, yeah, they're just gonna sort of very slowly collapse. Like WCW did. Satire. But hey, I'm a glutton for punishment, and if we ignore the whole these egomaniacal people wouldn't want to do this thing, here's how WCW should have booked Bret Hart. So it's late 1997 and the Montreal Screwjob has happened. You know what that is. It's a cheeky little bit of rambunctious shenanigans from Mr. Vincent McMahon. So on November 9th, Bret Hart wrestles his final match for WWF, and then he leaves in a grumpy way. It's bad. On Nitro the next night, out comes Bischoff, Hogan, all the NWO motley crew. They've all got Canadian flags. Ooh, someone's coming. Who's it gonna be? We got a Canadian. So the Canadian guy is obviously Bret Hart, but he doesn't debut right away. He debuts about a month or so later. And he says, I'm not going to join the NWO. I'm going to be a special guest referee for the match between Eric Bischoff and Larry Zbyszko for control of WCW. And he's like, it's a bit underwhelming, but Bret has a 60-day no-compete clause, which we can't get around. He cannot wrestle. So, of course, as we all know, Hart gets involved in the main event of Starrcade 1997. It's one of the most hyped main events of all time. Sting basically didn't wrestle for about a year. Everything was built up. The hero of WCW versus the leader of the NWO, Hollywood Hulk Hogan. The finish was either botched or sabotaged, depending on who you believe. Nick Patrick was supposed to count a fast 3 count, and then Bret would come out being, it's not happening here. You know, he'd come out, make sure, ain't no screw jobs happening on my watch, no howdy, bad business. Then he forced the match to restart, and Sting locked Hulk Hogan in a sharpshooter. Sorry, the Scorpion Deathlock. Well, the Scorpion Deathlock did come first, actually. The sharpshooter was stolen from the Scorpion Deathlock, I mean. Long story short, Bret Hart comes in and saves the day, and Sting is a new champion. Thing is, Nick Patrick either forgot to do a fast 3 count, or was told not to by Hulk Hogan, who didn't want to make Sting look good in any way. So in a sense, all Bret Hart did was come out and ruin a main event. Hulk Hogan beat Sting clean, and Bret Hart's like, that's not happening here. What are you talking about, Bret? Are you drunk? Then Bret Hart beat Ric Flair at Sold Out. That's better. Then, despite him pledging to not join the NWO, he turned on Randy Savage in April, handed Hulk Hogan the title, became an associate of the NWO. turned heel. He sort of was like Hogan's henchman. He became part of NWO Hollywood, turned face again, was gonna fight Hulk Hogan for the first time, turned heel at the end of that on Sting, won the US Championship a bunch of times. 4 times, actually. 4 times. He lost the US belt because of comedian Will Sasso, who he then wrestled. Will Sasso looks like this. He did the excellent Goldberg, oh, spear me Goldberg, haha, I'm wearing a fridge door, you f***ing idiot. He did that, then quit immediately to have surgery, and then unfortunately Owen Hart died. So he took a bunch of time off of that. Everyone says that the fire sort of went out of his eyes. Like he had no passion for the wrestling industry. He came back, had an amazing match, one of the best matches in WCW history with Chris Benoit, which has since been dubbed the Owen Hart tribute match. He won the WCW title finally at Mayhem, and then his career was ended by a thrust kick from Goldberg. One bad kick to the head. Multiple concussions on top of that. He wrestled a hardcore match with Terry Funk, then he wrestled a couple more matches, and then he had to give up the title and then leave wrestling forever until he would come back and wrestle Vince McMahon in the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. See, it's one of the biggest missed opportunities in wrestling because Bret Hart was coming out of the Montreal Screwjob, which is one of the most outrageous things to happen in wrestling ever. The curtain had been thrown back, that you saw this huge backstage politic thing happening. Bret Hart left in a storm of controversy. He was coming to WCW. He was on a huge contract, and he just got thrown into the NWO shuffle, which sounds like a really fun dance. I imagine it would go like this. Actually, no, wouldn't it? It would go like this, wouldn't it? Yeah. I'm cool, me. He deserved more than being Hulk Hogan's lackey. He was only in 2 pay-per-view main events during his first year with the company. And simply put, when you import a guy like Bret Hart, that won't do. And I can do it better. So right, I'm gonna do a few months of stuff for Bret. I'm not gonna do the entire 2 years he was there. You think you want that, but you don't. Basically, you need to capitalize on Hart's debut. The entire wrestling world, the eyes of the industry are on him at this point, and you need to do something big. Absolutely, he should be at Starrcade. Absolutely, he should feature in the main event. But he shouldn't be seen until that point. Like the day after Survivor Series, yes, bring out the NWO with their Canadian flags, and they say someone big, something Canadian this way comes. He's going to be absolutely huge. He's going to turn the tide for the NWO. He's a talent so huge that Vince McMahon couldn't afford him, and he's going to help the NWO destroy WCW for good. So we got the main event of Starrcade. None of this match restart bollocks. That's bullshit. And look, it doesn't matter if the reason why you want to do the whole match restart thing is because Hogan didn't want to put Sting over clean because apparently Sting was a little bit out of shape. You don't sacrifice the biggest match of the year, possibly the biggest match in the history of your company, for that kind of pettiness. So they're having the match, and Bret Hart hasn't shown for the entirety of Starrcade. People don't actually know where he is. And during that match, the referee goes down, and out comes Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. So you've got the 3 NWO guys that started it all, the Outsiders and Hulk Hogan. And they're all beating up on Sting when out comes Bret the Hitman Hart. I look like Toru Yano. All 3 NWO members offer him a handshake, and he clears the ring with, I don't know, a lead pipe or something. He takes out the NWO, throws the referee back into the ring just as Sting catches Hulk Hogan with a Scorpion Deathlock. He taps out, new champion. So the next night on Nitro, Bret Hart explains himself, and it has to be the truth because everyone knows the truth about this situation, and that's what people want Bret to address. So he comes out and says, I was unbeatable in the WWF. They had to screw me to beat me. He says, now, I can't get my hands on that little bitch Shawn, but I sure as hell can take it out of his best friends. Hall, Nash, get your ass down here. So out comes Hall and Nash, HBK's clique buddies. Now, most hardcore wrestling fans knew that HBK was friends with Hall and Nash. I mean, after all, Nash was frequently shouting out Shawn Michaels on TV. So Hall and Nash and Hart, they start fighting, then out comes Jim the Anvil Neidhart and the British Bulldog. These guys left WWF at the same time. They were similarly furious with the treatment of Bret, so they've come to WCW to also whip the out of Shawn Michaels' buddies. So it's sold out. You have the Outsiders versus the Hart Foundation, although you can't call them that, so maybe call them the Hart Reunion, or the Hart Sensation, or the Hart Pink. I don't know. And during this match, Bret Hart picks up the win by locking Kevin Nash in the sharpshooter. And at this point, you could say that the booking falls apart because Kevin Nash wouldn't want to do that. But it. Just it. Meanwhile, on the same card, Sting beats Hulk Hogan to retain his WCW championship. It wasn't vacated just because, oh God, it was so wretched. So then we cement Hart in the eyes of the fans. Now he's already beaten two guys he's got a very legitimate and personal grievance with, and now we give him a dream match. Like Hulk Hogan, when he came into WCW, he was immediately put into a match with Ric Flair because that is the match that everyone wanted. And in this case, we put Bret Hart with Hollywood Hulk Hogan. You know, we get the match we should have had at SummerSlam 1993 when Hulk Hogan was supposed to pass the torch to Bret, but he preferred not to, instead losing the belt to Yokozuna and then just sitting out SummerSlam in its entirety. Good job, Hulkster! Yeah, you're a good guy. So Super Brawl has a double main event. One is Sting versus Scott Hall for the WCW World Championship, which Scott Hall earned at World War III. And the second is the dream match, Hart versus Hogan. And at Super Brawl, Bret Hart loses to Hulk Hogan via NWO interference. Now I know, you don't want Bret Hart to come in and suffer a big loss, but the Bret Hart Hulk Hogan storyline, that's got a ways to go, and you don't want to spaff it all up the wall for the sake of one quick feel-good moment. So Hogan has won, and afterwards Bret Hart, he wants the Hollywood Hulkster. But he knows the numbers game is too much for him. After all, Hogan has the Outsiders backing him up. They're the guys who interfered at Super Brawl. So Hart gets some backup in the form of Ric Flair and Sting. So you've got this giant six-man tag main event at Uncensored. The NWO, Hogan, Hall and Nash versus Sting, Bret Hart and Ric Flair. WCW versus NWO, basically. At Uncensored, you've got this nice moment where Sting and Bret Hart have Hall and Nash in double sharpshooters, or a scorpion deathlock and a sharpshooter if you want to be a pedantic twat hammer. But the match ends in NWO victory again when Jim the Anvil Neidhart and British Bulldog turn on Bret Hart and join the NWO. Once again, Hulk Hogan pins Bret Hart. So Bulldog and Neidhart, theirs isn't just a random betrayal like most of the NWO betrayals were. They've actually got reasons for doing what they did, and their reasons is, we were really happy in WWF, thanks. We had to leave because of some familial duty to Bret Hart. Basically, he dragged us out of the company because he refused to do business, and now we're in this hole, you bunch of arsehole fans. So yeah, we don't owe Bret a goddamn thing. So at Spring Stampede, we get another first on pay-per-view, and it's always good to do these because then WCW can claim, hey, we're giving you stuff that the WWF never gave you. It's Bret Hart versus Jim Neidhart, the implosion of the Hart Foundation in singles match form. This match was never done on a WWF pay-per-view. In fact, I think it was only done one time, the actual singles match itself, at Madison Square Garden, and I think it was a house show. So Hart versus Neidhart with the British Bulldog in his corner, and Bret, of course, defeats Jim Neidhart using the sharpshooter. But the NWO, those rapscallions, run down, and with the help of Neidhart, Bulldog, Hall, Nash, all those guys, they leave Bret Hart bloody in the ring. After that, Bret Hart declares war on the NWO. They took my kin from me, they've done nothing but beat me down, and finally they made me bleed. I'm going to murder them. He reveals that he's got a kill list of every single member of the NWO, and he makes a deal with Eric Bischoff. Every time that Bret Hart fights a member of the NWO, if Bret Hart loses, he is fired from WCW. However, if Bret Hart wins, that member of the NWO must quit the NWO. So Bret Hart starts working his way through them. At this point, Bret Hart essentially becomes the Punisher, or, you know, a hitman. Now, at this point in the real life storyline, the NWO split in twain to become Hollywood and Wolfpack. We're not doing that. We're not doing that because it's bullshit. This is when the NWO started to go really, really wrong. You had this confusing two different logos. They both sort of looked the same-ish. You had the red and the black and white. You had all the admin, because you had to work out who was part of which faction with these guys, the faces. It just became a bloated, unwieldy, confusing mess. And at that point, you've just got to know that your idea's died. All right, you've run out of steam. So why not have the NWO end definitively with a bang rather than just bleh, bleh. So at this point, about June, May, there's no more new members for the NWO, and Bret Hart works his way through that roster on Nitro, Thunder, and on pay-per-view. He defeats Kurt Hennig, he defeats Vincent, he defeats Bryan Adams. At Slamboree, so we're in May, Bret Hart defeats Randy Savage and purges him from the group. He defeats him with the help of Sting. This becomes a recurring feature because no one wants the NWO dead more than the Stinger. However, at that same Slamboree in the main event, Hogan regains the WCW title from Sting. Meanwhile, the Hitman is working his way through the NWO, picking off guys left, right, and center. He's got this huge surge of momentum, and the NWO's numbers are dwindling, and as they are, the infighting begins. Basically, you have to protect some of these top guys after the NWO is dead, so you have to start turning some of them face now. And well, basically they wanted Kevin Nash to be the face, so you start making him sick of all this NWO bullshit. At the Great American Bash, Sting and Bret Hart team up to take on Hall and Nash. They win, and the outsiders, the two guys who started the group, are gone from the NWO, leaving just one guy. Just one guy. That man is Hollywood Hulk Hogan, the WCW champ. Now at this point, this is around the time that Goldberg became WCW champion, defeating Hogan on free TV. But hold off on that. Wait for a couple of months, maybe 6 months if you have to. Do not crown Goldberg yet. We've got a story going on here. Because at Bash at the Beach, 2 years after Hulk Hogan turned heel, 2 years after the NWO was formed, the NWO finally comes to a head. You've got Hart versus Hogan, career versus title, with the NWO hanging in the balance. Finally, after pinning him twice, Hollywood Hogan loses to Bret the Hitman Hart. The NWO is dead, and WCW has a new champion in the form of Bret Hart. That, my friends, is how you capitalize on someone as gigantic as the Hitman. So I imagine some of you might be caps lock wondering, what about Goldberg? I would give Bret Hart a good few months with the title. I would then have a top heel, maybe Hogan if he's still heel or if he wants to turn face. A top heel dethrone Hart at World War III. It should ideally be Hulk Hogan, so then he doesn't have to do that whole running for president thing. So Goldberg wins World War III, he's got the championship match. That is at Starrcade. And yeah, I think Starrcade, Hogan versus Goldberg for the WCW title, undefeated streak still intact. Yeah, I think that would be all right, that. I think that feels like a match I'd want to see. You know, again, rather than on an episode of Nitro. And that is how I would book Bret Hart in And that is how I would book Bret Hart in WCW. Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter here. I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com, and I'll see you soon. Come to think of it, I shouldn't even be wearing these because, like, he didn't wear these in WCW, did he? He wore the John Lennon little ones. I don't have any of those. This is just, everything about this is bad. Look, they turn into a little cylinder. Look.